Emily's up first, and she's going to talk about her restoration at Little Creek Farm, carrying on Ben's tradition of restoration. So, yeah. And then we'll have Grant afterwards. We'll do questions at the end. Then if people want to leave remotely, it's easier. So, yeah, come on up then.
You mind showing me how to make it work? Is there a way to or just
Swipe and swipe.
okay.
And then
Okay, excellent.
okay, thanks.
Cool. So I think everyone here probably knows me. I'm Emily Gilbert and live at Little Creek Farm. We took the farm over from Ben Bernstein 3 years ago. And we're carrying on the habitat restoration that he was doing at the coast. You can sort of see in this little fenced area. So 3 years ago, we did a trial planting in there. This is a hair-proof fence, just with chicken wire. And we had some success with the tussock in there, but a number of plants outside, everything was smashed either by hares or geese. And it was a bit demoralising, but the fact that things had gone well in there suggested that it could be done. So last year applied for a Darwin Plus local grant, which was successful. If I'm going too fast, if I'm not being clear, please wave and shout at me and I'll translate it. So this is where we are. It used to be Elephant Beach, but we changed the name back to Little Creek, partly because Ben was still trading as Elephant Beach Limited. Elephant Beach is on Smiley's land. It was all just a bit confusing, so we have gone back to Little Creek. The area known as Goblin's Head is this little piece here. Do you want me to kind of move? Yeah. You can see it kind of looks like a goblin's head. So it wasn't a named piece of coast, so we put that in. It's a headland that's about 150 hectares, and you could see in the previous one, and you'll see in some of the other photos, there's quite a lot of diddle-dee dieback happening here, so it all appears quite silver on the Google Earth, and I guess people have seen it in real life. So the plan was to build a fence, build a hair-proof fence. Turns out that's not as easy as it sounds. So this is the fence now, and you can see the silveriness of the dieback area. The actual fence is quite high. We imported vinyl-coated mesh, the intent being that in a salty environment it would last a lot longer. The original chicken wire around that little square is already rusting through because it's so exposed to salt air, it's just not going to last. This stuff hopefully will last a lot better. It's been dug into the ground. There's a bit more on how the fence was built. But whilst the main stretch of fence, quite straightforward, relatively flat, cliff at this end, intertidal this end, much more difficult than I anticipated. So the intertidal mud that actually is more tidal than we thought on a very low spring tide, it dries out beyond the edge of the gabion. So still work to be done, but at the moment it seems to be effective. So this is where we've got 2 gabions out, and I think we're going to probably end up doing another one out past that channel at low tide. The problem with this is that whilst it's very strong, and we did weigh it all down with boulders at the bottom, you've still got a tidal current through there, you've still got a lot of seaweed, you've still got a lot of weight and pressure on that fence. So this is the high risk point. It is electrified all the way down, so this is the energiser and electric. Currently the area is not stocked, but at some point there is likely to be stock in this side. So that's there to prevent anything big coming through. Jeremy came and bought his flail mower, Jan bought his tractor. We had lots of machinery and things going on, but effectively it was flail mowed to get rid of vegetation around the roof of the fence, and then a rotary plough, was that the thing? Rotary plough which dug a small trench and chucked the material onto one side so that then the fence could be folded underneath, the dirt put back in, so that even if a hare or something is scraping, they'll be scraping into the fence and shouldn't go underneath. Because hares here don't tend to burrow, just scrape, or sorry, be told. Gabions, very, very, very labour intensive. So about a ton of rock each one. Kind of thought, oh yeah, 1 at each end, that makes sense. No, not more. And so that was a lot of manpower and labour. And phase 2, once the fence was in place, we did go down and took the dog. She's not a trained sniff dog or invasive species dog, but she does like to chase a hare. And she no longer chases hares in there because there doesn't seem to be any. So we did do a little bit of lethal control, and that was an area, because it was a Darwin project, we had to get a letter of support from the Environment Department to allow lethal control. But currently, there doesn't seem to be any hares in there. There's no scat, there's nothing that we have seen, and so far, nothing seems to be being predicted. So some photos of the actual planting area. This is day 1 or 2 of planting, so you can't see a huge amount other than the old plantation. And on the other side is some of the work that Ben had started previously. We did a site walkover right at the beginning with Atlantic Harvest and advice from Jeremy, because whilst we had the success from previously, a lot of the plants that were planted outside also hadn't taken and had been protected, and some of the ones within the fence hadn't taken. So the site walkover was to try and find better specific areas of habitat for the specific plant plants we were buying in. So what we've done is focus predominantly on tussock in here, and further up into the dieback is a mix of Wade and Cooch and bluegrass. We'll get on to some other photos, but around the actual headland and in the exposed bits there, we've got boxwood and more bluegrass, and different things that either seem to already be trying to grow in naturally, or areas where they are more likely to have a chance of survival. Along with plough plants, we also had tillers. So we did pull some tillers from the existing area over here, but you're quite limited by the stock of plants there. So we had permission from Byron to go up to the Cape, so we did 2-day trips to the Cape to pull tillers from the bigger stand there. What we hope to do in future is also get some tillers from elsewhere, just so that there is a better genetic mix of plants. Because obviously from tillers, you're getting from one plant. So a combination of them and plugs will hopefully give us a better genetic diversity. So this is the old fence. Standards only in there to prove that it's a same point monitoring. So we did put in new tillers and new plug plants within the fenced area to infill some of that, as well as predominantly planting outside of it. So you can sort of see where the planning was coming to. We have covered this entire area now and gone up here and along the coast and out beyond the vehicles over here as well. Numbers of plants, and again we focus on those specific species. We had originally intended to also do cinnamon grass, but actually there's quite healthy stands of cinnamon grass already. So we're like, well, we'll see how that goes, and maybe we could break that up and encourage it to spread naturally rather than bringing in more. This is some of the eroded edges. So bluegrass is trying to get in here, but we went along really hard going, not as easy as just sticking a spade in the ground. So this involved augers and a lot of Jeremy's labour. But we did get them in. Jeremy, what's this?
That's one of the protected plants of Wade and saxifrage.
Wade and saxifrage. So we also had, very kindly grown by Jeremy, because it is under licence, and he's shared that with the Environment Department. But we've also tried out a couple of protected species, and they're sort of up in the air, just to see whether we can establish populations of them and if they'll benefit from not having hares there. There are still geese. Geese can still fly in and out of the area, so we know that they are still there and can predate on the plants. And there appears to be a resident flock of 9 who we saw every time we were down there. We didn't shoot because the thinking being that if that's their area, then they'll fight off others. We'll see. We're also changing up the planting, so tillers, just normal, less than a metre apart sort of thing. But some of the nursery areas of the Wade and Cooch and the boxwood, we planted much closer together in the hope that that will establish, so that we'll be able to get seed or plants from that in the next couple of years. The other thing that was different is we treated pretty much all of the plug plants. I say we, Atlantic Harvest. So they were all sprayed with methylphenolate, might be pronouncing that wrong, as well as waterproofing. So this is specifically to deter predation. It tastes horrid, it puts geese off, hopefully, and it seems to be really, really successful. It will have washed off by now, but after the first however many thousand plants had gone in, when we went back there were only 8 over, that was after 3 visits, 8 plug plants had been pulled out, whereas previously we were losing huge amounts, and you'd go down and you'd have all the plugs and their roots would just be drying out and they'd be laid on the ground, where a goose has just literally caught them out of the hole. So initial results really, really promising that that is successful. I think Jeremy had a bit of trial and error with getting the waterproofing and getting it to stick, but we are very pleased with the results so far. We're also committing to photo monitoring, just to try and keep an eye on the growth of the plants. Probably need to go and put some more sticks in to have more specific photo monitoring spots other than the existing fence. And oh yes, hares. I don't know a huge amount about hare foraging behaviour. From what I've read and what I've heard, they don't do a lot of foraging in the intertidal zone, so maybe the chance of them walking around the gabions is low at a very low tide. I don't know. You don't see footprints, or I haven't seen footprints, but that could just be anecdotal. So we're kind of going to need to keep an eye on that and see whether that is a risk, and if it is, build more gabions. And yeah, fence maintenance, we're going to have to keep that up to make sure that the hares aren't getting through, and livestock also. And part of that is going to be keeping an eye on how much of the seaweed is there, because ultimately it might end up damaging the fence. Whilst there's not a huge current through there, the seaweed does make it very difficult. Challenges, the gabions. I should have put that at the top. The long supply chain. So the Darwin Local, I don't know how many people have been through that application process, but you get 2 Darwin Local project lengths, and the one I got was 6 months. That isn't really long enough, and I wouldn't recommend doing a project like this in 6 months, because trying to get everything here, get the mesh here, everything arrived except a staple gun, which yes, you could buy locally, but then that's already messing with your budget and stuff. And ammunition. We'd applied and we had permission for lethal control. As I'm sure people are aware, there was a national ammunition shortage and you couldn't buy it. Thankfully, we didn't have major shooting. It wasn't too bad of an issue. That 6 months also, so the project had to be completed by the 31st of March. If this had been last year or the year before, it would have been too dry and it would have risked the survival of pretty much all of those plug plants and tillers, because the conditions would have been just too dry for planting. Whereas we were quite lucky, there was lots of places where it was still quite wet, and yeah, hopefully that will contribute to a greater success rate. Also, if people are planning to apply for Darwin local grants, it is really good and a lot of it is quite straightforward, but I think I'm going to ask them if they can have a better flowchart of how things work, because I paused the project for almost a month and a half waiting for funds without realising that there was actually another step in the process where you had to fill in another form, even though you'd already sent your police check and your bank details and everything. There was actually another one to specifically say, I want them on this date, which I didn't realise. So there's lots of little things like that, but if anyone is thinking of Darwin local projects and would like to chat, I'm more than happy to. Hopefully this is a video. It is a little bit jerky, it's a nice drone video taken by Jeremy, but just to give you an idea of some of the coast, it will slow down in a minute. But this is where we are, we're coming up to the fence now. We're sort of planting in lots of these little eroded bits all the way along and round. And it is quite harsh on that side, hence the need for the gabion and concerns about the fence on the cliffwood side. But yeah, I don't know how ambitious a hare would be around that way. People feeding and foraging. yeah, so we've got quite a lot of bluegrass and boxwood in those sorts of areas. This is quite good, showing some of the where the diddle-dee is starting to go silver and grey. And this one, this just shows that you can see some of the plants as they were going in. We need to invite Mary back to get some more now that it's all planted up. But it's also a good one for future monitoring because you can see the extent. Aerial photos are quite good, just for demonstrating that. I think it takes us as far as the fence. Nice little area for camping. So yeah, and that's it. That's my presentation. So thank you very much to Biodiversity Challenge Funds. They provided the cash to make this project happen. Atlantic Harvest, without them we couldn't have done it. We had the plug plants, we had advice, we had labour, we had trailer, everything from Atlantic Harvest. The Environment Department, as I said, they wrote us a letter of support to allow us to undertake lethal control. Byron, access to Cape tillers, and then lots and lots and lots of other people who came and filled galleons or carried rocks or planted. So yes, thank you very much to everyone.
Grant is the sites officer at Falklands Conservation, for anyone that hasn't met you before, Grant.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah. I might need to next time. Yeah. Grant, do you mind if I could get you facing this way as well, but so I can... Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I made this presentation up so it was a bit flexible. It could be longer, it could be shorter, and I could miss some slides out. So the first little bit is more just scene setting, and then the remainder of it is just some prettier pictures of the work that we did. So, I mean, this was very much a trial. We hadn't tried to move Cobb's Wren before, so this was very much a kind of an experiment to try and learn from, with the idea that we could expand it out to further islands. So, okay. So a little bit of background. You're probably all aware, Cobb's Wren is one of our 3 endemic bird species to the Falkland Islands, so it occurs here and nowhere else. Its preferred habitat, both beaches backed by thick tussock, but it only occurs on rodent-free islands, so if mice or rats are present, then you won't get Cobb's Wren. Cobb's Wren is a little bit like a mouse with wings. It seems to fill that niche that a little mouse would do. It tends to scamper around on rocky beaches, feed in the foreshore, doesn't tend to fly if it doesn't have to. So yeah, in kind of actions it's very much like a mouse with wings. So just the competition and I guess direct predation as well on nests. These 2 maps are slightly old now, so apologies to Sally. I think I stole them from some of her work back in 2011. Since then a few extra islands have been cleared, but it was really just to show that this is the original remnant distribution of Cobb's Wren. Obviously it would have occurred all the way around the coastlines initially, but as rats and mice have spread out with human arrival, it's been limited to these offshore islands, which with the work are set about 1 kilometre from the shore, so a rat can swim about 1 kilometre in Falkland waters. So to be secure from natural rat invasion, it has to be about 1 kilometre away from the mainland or another island with rats. So this was your remnant population, and if you can imagine sort of moving this map up and on to that map, these are the 65, I think? Yes, 65 islands that have been cleared and remain rat-free. If you move that up onto that, you can sort of see that we're starting to get a more complete distribution around the islands, and then hopefully a little bit of population continuity. The little bottom point, I'll go into that later, so let's go on. So, for example, some of these island groups which have been cleared, the chances of them naturally recolonising are pretty much next to zero. If you look at Double or Outer Island, well, the nearest remnant Cobb's Wren populations are way out in the Passage Islands or Hummock Island, and they would have to fly across the mainland to reach that, and it's just not going to happen. Likewise, the Arch Islands, you're away across at Speedwell and George, or Bird Island before you've got a population of Cobb's Wren. So if we just took these, for example, the islands I circled in. Anyway, if you just took these red circled island groups, it's quite efficient. For example, if you were to reintroduce to the Arch Island, they are then all subsequently close enough that if you introduce to one of the Arch Islands, once that first introduction had reached capacity, it's close enough to disperse to the other island groups. What we don't tend to see is Cobb's Wren dispersing much more than about 8 kilometres from a site with Cobb's Wren to a cleared island. That seems to be about the limit of their flying. It depends slightly whether it's upwind, downwind, from one island to another island and such like, but take that as a rough rule of thumb.
I think you've muted yourself so Jim can't hear you talking anymore.
All right.
Yeah.
There we go. Put it back on. Tight. You're back again, I think. Hopefully. That was me. Apologies. So a few little details about the Cobb's Wren. Robin Woods did some ringing a few years ago, early 90s, and he rang some birds and then he checked annually for up to 6 years before he stopped checking, and there were still ringed birds present after 6 years. So we know that they can live as long as 6 years, possibly longer. Generally speaking, they can produce up to 4 eggs in a clutch, and they can double brood on occasion. It's usually just one brood a year, but there have been instances where, when in Robin's woodwork, he saw that they had double brooded, so they produced 2 sets of chicks in a season. So their reproductive potential is actually quite high, but if they're living for 5 to 6 years and they're on an island which is already at capacity, there's an overproduction of juveniles. You don't need that many juveniles to replace the adult population that's dying. So these juveniles at the end of the season, and you will have possibly seen it occasionally on the mainland, they either have to disperse off the island to the mainland where they're going to get eaten by cats and rats and other things and they won't survive, or they have to go to some suboptimal small territory on the island where again their chances of success are fairly slim. So the idea of the reintroduction programme was to kind of use these juveniles which were sort of doomed beforehand and give them a fighting chance. So you could take a percentage of that excess population of the juveniles, move them to a rat-free island, you're introducing them to a new good habitat for Cobb's Wren that is not limited, so their chances of survival are much higher, and then hopefully they'll breed up. This was the... so before we started, having done the sort of literature review and looked at Robin's woodwork and then just done some back of the envelope, it wasn't a full scientific report, back of the envelope calculations, we worked out that we could take about 20% of the Cobb's Wren on an island off, place it on another island, we shouldn't have any impact on that original breeding population. The spaces would be filled up by that year's production of juveniles with our extraction. So to be conservative, we did a survey of Kidney Island, and you can actually see how territorial they are. We did 2 circuits, one to the west, one to the east. These were the points where we counted Cobb's Wren, and you'll see that they're fairly regularly spread all the way around. And we had a license to move 20 birds, and it almost seems like it was a bit of a scam because that meant we would have had to count 100 birds to be allowed to remove 20, and we counted 97, which was just coincidence. So how do we? How do you just minimise that? As I say, the idea was to move predominantly juveniles. Again, we had permission to take a few adults if we felt it was appropriate. Obviously, we do want to make sure we've got a breeding pair. Juveniles actually have a 50-50 balanced sex ratio. As they get older, then male survival is higher than female survival. Females obviously have a higher burden with egg laying and brooding and everything else. They don't tend to live as long. So if you target adults, chances are you're actually going to get a skewed population with more males and females. So another advantage of taking the juveniles is you've got a better chance of getting a 50-50 split. Because in the field, there isn't any 100% sure way of sexing. So in adults, breeding adults, you can have a good guess, but it's not absolutely certain. So in the adults, this is what you call a brood patch. So females, to better incubate the eggs, you want this sort of skin to egg contact, and that's a better transferal of heat. So the females in the breeding season lose a little patch of feathers from their underbelly, and that's a brood patch. And then the males have a slight swelling of their cloacal area, so a bit like hemorrhoids. And that's how you tell them. But obviously, you know, if it doesn't have a brood patch, you can't see the cloacal patch, you can't 100% say. But the difference between the adults and the juveniles is quite distinct. By the end of the season, the adults are like your typical parents. They're looking a little bit frazzled and overworked, whilst the kids are all quite plump and happy and always chirping. So you can tell the difference quite easily. You know, if anyone's interested, I can pass these on. The only one that we were avoiding, we did it in January, which we felt was a kind of a good compromise between the fledglings would be old enough to be independent and looking after themselves, but not so old that they were starting to disperse to the mainland and off island, so there was still a good number of them there. But what we did want to avoid is any that were still dependent on the adults. So we didn't want to catch a female with a brood patch because she'd still be incubating. All the females that we caught actually had feather regrowth on that patch, so you could tell they had recently bred, but were no longer active. And then this was the only one we saw that was still dependent, and it's still got a very fleshy beak at the base of the beak, and also just by its actions, it was just sitting there chirping and begging from the adult still. So we left that one alone. So there, that's the difference between the adult and the chick. So how did we move them? We did the, some of you may recognise these boxes which we moved. We put them individually into boxes because, as already said, wrens are quite territorial, so they will be aggressive to each other. In fact, the very first wren that we caught and put into a box, we tucked it under the shade underneath the tussock bog, and the resident territorial male flew straight down and started attacking it through the mesh. So subsequently we had to put a little curtain on the front just to keep them not visible. These were Department of Conservation from New Zealand rat trap boxes previously. So we previously had mesh on both ends and then a big rat trap in the middle. So a snappy splatty bit in the middle, which obviously I didn't want. So we took that out and then that was converted. So wrens can be a little bit, well, they're fairly infamous in the UK for being quite wriggly and feisty. Thankfully our ones are an awful lot tamer. But I designed this box to get them in there. So the box has its little hole into the back nesting chamber. And then if you push this across to the stop, the holes exactly line up. You can take your wren in your hand, put it through the sock, grab the sock. That's now closed, can't escape. And then you take the other one, push it across. And actually right in there, all safe and secure. So that's where we transferred them in. And as I say, in the end, it's got water and food in the front. And in the end, we actually just put a little curtain over the front just to give it a little bit more privacy and to stop the resident territorial birds coming down and stressing each other out. These were the this was a protocol we designed beforehand, and this was with the licence conditions within our licence for moving them. So we wanted to give them sufficient time in the morning so they had fed and provisioned and water. They were full up. Obviously, wrens are very small birds, they've got a very high metabolism, so they're always needing to eat, they're using their energy very quickly. So it's to make sure that they fed beforehand and then giving them time in the evening once we'd let them go so they could then find their spot for the night, find provisions and water. It all went really, really well. We caught 7 in the end, which again, it was a learning. It doesn't sound so much. We had a bit of a late start that day for other reasons, as we didn't have a full day of effort, and we kind of learned as we were going. And I will sort of point out what we could have done better. So this is a mist net which we use for catching them. It's a very, very fine net which you'll see the tensioning lines across, and the net comes down and then kind of goes back up to create a little pocket below that. So the birds would fly into there and then you kind of fall down into the pocket where they kind of get trapped. Generally speaking, you think it looks like they're going to get horrendously tangled up. They don't generally tend to. A few of them, if they panic, can get a little bit tangled up, and that's why we brought down a British Trust for Ornithology instructor in ringing and mist netting. In the UK, you have to be licensed to use mist netting, but because of that, if you actually look at all the methods you can catch birds by, mist nets is the lowest injury rate of any capture method of a wild bird. So they are very efficient. When we first started, we set them perpendicular to the beach, thinking that we could kind of gently herd the Cobb's wren along the beach and into the net. Cobb's wren are like cats, they won't herd. They're quite tame, so they kind of just look at you and whatever, or double back, or even just go under a rock, and you can then stand on top of the rock and it will still just stay under there quite happily, going, well, no, I'm not moving. So that wasn't very effective, but what we did notice was that they do tend to use distinct entry and exit points from the beach. So if there's a little tussock bog that sticks out further, or has got a good bit of cover, or is near where the sort of male's territorial spot is, then they'll just always use that same point, come out onto the beach, and then go back there. So if we set the nets parallel to the beach, then that was a lot more effective. I think in the future, possibly, we might also look at having a sort of a butterfly net, a muslin or something like that. We were recommended against that initially, but I think that was very much from someone who was picturing Cobb's wren a bit like the UK wren, which are much more active, are kind of quite feisty. The Cobb's wren here are a lot tamer. So, for example, in that situation where a Cobb's wren's gone under a rock and you're standing on it, you could use a butterfly net and you just pop it out into the net, and I think it'd be absolutely fine. What you're not wanting to do is kind of madly swipe at it and end up knocking it out. But I do think that would be an added technique to sort of increase our catch efficiency. Also, it's probably more tidal in time of day, but birds are obviously more active in the morning, so you want to really catch that morning spell, which we missed on this occasion. And that was doubly important because early in the morning coincided with high tide, where you've got all this newly delivered food on the tide with the moist kelp rack that they're all feeding on. So again, you want to kind of catch that high tide period where they're moving in and out from the beach. These were just again to show the mist netting. That in that picture it looked quite obvious, but when you've actually got a background behind it, the mist net really does just disappear into it. So once we had caught them in the mist net, we put them in a little cotton bag, transferred them to the central sort of handling area, central handling area, we would take some measurements, wing length and bone lengths of the birds for our records, and then we would ring them. And the idea being that when you release them on an island with no Cobb's wren, then all the birds you release are going to have rings on. So if you go back the next year and you find one that doesn't have a ring, you can assume that that was a successful breeding, so that they're all marked. And you can really see that, generally speaking, the birds were all very calm with the handling. I'm not saying they weren't stressed, but they didn't show massive outward signs of being too bothered by it all. And this is Will, who was training. He's been here before. He's come down and gave training on ringing black-red albatrosses and other birds as well. So he has visited the Falklands before. And Grace, who is our UK office administrator, and she is a ringer in the UK as well. So it's quite handy to have her down during the period. This is a video. Right. Again, it's really just to kind of show that they were fairly calm. I think possibly a sea lion had just been going past. That's what the two of them were looking in all directions. I'm not sure I would do it. My hands are too shaky. Instead, I would snap its leg off. But yeah, it was all fairly straightforward. Go on to the next slide. Right, there we go. So we actually moved them in 2 batches because we went super fast with the catching. We moved 5 across initially when they were carried on doing some trapping, and then we moved the last 2 as we were going home in the evening. The reason being, we actually, the weather can be too good sometimes, and it was a calm day. It was absolutely roasting. We had the boxes hidden under tussock bogs to try and keep them cool, but we thought really we don't want them cooking in the boxes, so we'll just move the ones that we've already caught. We were only going to Top Island, which is 8 kilometres away, so it was a quick trip there, and drop them off. And this was the purpose in which we picked. They all flew away quite happily. There wasn't any instances where there looked like been any damage or displaced feathers or anything else. Only one of them possibly had Stockholm syndrome, so we let him go, and he flew straight back to the boxes, and myself hung around before he eventually decided, right, okay, I'm off. And it was really cute. As regards some of the conservation work we do, kind of reintroducing things like this and seeing them fly off, it really did give you a good feel good moment. So you can see the tussock straw rustling out onto the front, and off they go. And some of them were almost at the highway code. They would just sit here for a moment, they do a little look right, look left again, and then fly off. And yeah, it was really quite good. So that's really it.
I did ask Grant and Emily if they had any tips for people that wanted to have a go at some restoration of their own, and we both quickly said that the most important thing is to just get on and have a try, so and learn from your mistakes. Would that be a fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've just come back from Pebble Islet not so long ago, and I was just down there for myself, and when you saw the work that needed to be done, it was a little bit overwhelming. But yeah, just anything's better than nothing, and even just by yourself after a week. The first day you thought, Struce, I've done absolutely nothing, this will take forever. But just a little bit each time, and it soon starts to mount up.
And if anyone hasn't got some land to plant it on, I'm sure we can do some matchmaking of people. So if anyone, just send me an email. If anyone would like to have a go at growing stuff, I'll send some instructions for growing native plants and things around in the next email. And if anyone wants to have a go and would like them to be planted out on, maybe we could ask about planting on the common, or we've got land at Blue Beach, or maybe Everly. So yeah, don't let it hold you back if you feel you haven't got a big enough space. I'll just ask Jim and Nick if you've got any questions before we carry on with questions from the room. Have you got any questions, Nick or Jim?
No, just two good conservation stories. Good news, thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Really interesting to listen to, thank you.
Great, thanks. Has anyone else got questions? Go for it.
I guess maybe to Emily, but Grant as well. What's your thoughts about protecting rewilded areas for longevity whilst managing protected Pebble Islet, and obviously you're not planning on going anywhere, but what sort of measures can you do to protect for longevity? Really?
I think it depends on the area. I mean, the Ag Department has just started their land recovery scheme, but that area particularly, not the whole area that's fenced off. That point when we received we've got funding from Antarctic Research Trust and Springcreek Conservation Conservation 2 years ago, and part of that was that we signed up to, I think it was 10 years. But our intent is not to graze that area, partly because if you're putting that much effort into getting the tussock growing, to then stick something in straight away so it all gets eaten would just be quite demoralising. So I think there's different ways to do it, and yeah, I guess it depends. It depends whether there's stipulations attached to funding or if it's just a personal decision. But I guess if it's a personal decision, then that might be changed down the line. I don't know.
Any more questions?
Who administers Darwin Local?
So it's JNCC, so it's DEFRA money through, is this right? It's JNCC who come down and do it. So it's called Biodiversity Challenge Funds, and basically when the UK left the EU, overseas territories suddenly didn't have access to much in the way of biodiversity or conservation grant funding. So the purpose of the Darwin is to try and fill that gap, and Darwin Local specifically is for small projects, so up to £20,000, and they do two access rounds a year for all of the British OTs, and you can apply through Darwin to do projects that climate change, biodiversity, good environmental conservation things. Although I say that now, and I was really grateful for that project, but those Darwin funds are at risk now, and there is potential that the current UK government and this round of funding will take that away, and I think that is quite a risk. I think there might be a consultation out on it, but basically I think it's really important. It's really good for projects like ours, and if that funding is lost, then it again shrinks the pot for where we can get conservation funding for the OTs.
The Darwin Local is a very, very useful one for individual landowners. There are 3 levels of it. There's Darwin Strategic, which is a kind of £1 million type project. There's a Darwin Plus, which is for the OTs, and is several £100,000. But both of them have a very high demand in reporting and who can apply, and accountancy backup. And the gap was realised that for smaller projects that was really a bit onerous and discouraging to people to apply, so they kind of responded to the feedback and they introduced the Darwin Local, I think about 2 years ago, something like that, possibly 3, and that's much smaller. The reporting obligations are a lot less, and it's just a bit more streamlined and easier. So I think there's been a few ones locally. Dyke Islands received funding from it. We've received funding from it. I think the DOA has as well. So yeah, it's quite a useful project.
I think also don't the Environment Department sort of front it a bit here as well, I think?
I think they advertised it, but through the application process, I only got in touch with the Environment Department because if you had anything to do with control, you needed a supporting letter from the government. But other than that, no involvement from the Environment Department.
How long do you think you'll need to keep the hare-proof fencing up once the tussock's established? Or do you think that would go to stock-proof fencing?
I mean, I think it could probably go to stock-proof fencing. I think it was predominantly to try and increase the survival rates of the plug plants.
Yeah.
There's still the risk of geese, but from that project a couple of years ago where so many of them were just grazed off completely, that couldn't all be down to geese, because in places where there were hares and geese, they didn't seem to have been as impacted. But yeah, ultimately, once that's standard, and I think if we keep infilling for the next few years whilst the fence is in place, then hopefully it'll get to a point where it won't matter. So there's no hairproof fence on the other side, and you do see all around the edge of that plantation. But where it's thicker, maybe they don't like going in where the tussock is denser, same as geese. There is self-set tussock, and there are things taking off. So I guess there's a point where the population will do its own thing.
I find it interesting that there was 8 bug plants taste tested and 9 resident geese. There is at least one goose that listens to its mate.
That was really interesting. Yeah, the spray. Would you be able to tell us a bit more about that? And if it was, you know, is that something you think would be useful, or was it prohibitively expensive to use it in a big way, or?
Yeah, so the chemical that we were using, doing a couple of trials with it, we had one last year. It's completely harmless. It's actually used as a food flavouring, root beer, anything grape. That's basically what it smells of, but it does, birds don't like it. They start eating it. Triggers a reaction in their muscles and their face, and yeah, it's unpleasant, so they move away. But the difference is this year is the chemical that I got, it also comes with a UV tint, so that birds actually learn to recognise that particular colour, they learn to stay away from it. And works brilliant. The trouble is it washes off, especially if you're planting stuff in the rainy season.
Yeah.
So that's where I found a type of waterproof that, and the idea was you seal that on. And it did seem to work. Yeah, did 3 visits afterwards.
Yeah, and you can see, you know, Julie and everyone feeding on it from the waterproofing, and yet the ground conditions were still wet enough for the plant. So it seems, again, early days seems to have been very successful.
It was a big improvement from the previous ones.
Yeah.
Considering there was no treatment on a lot of plants, you're looking at, a good sort of 10-20% of them are either pulled out or chewed off. So it definitely does something.
Could you potentially respray it in situ from a knapsack sprayer or something?
Could be done, but if you're talking thousands of seedlings, it's much easier to do them before they get planted out.
No, it's both. You know, if it's washed off and maybe they're still within the kind of goose grazing window of height, then potentially could you reapply it? Or
it could easily be reapplied. It's just the logistics of doing it. Another option is to plant in summer when there's less rain, and that will be less rain means there's less chance of the seedlings taking, but it will mean that it stays on and provides protection for 3 months.
Is it expensive, Jerry? Like, could you do it on a big scale, or would it be?
Yes, it could be done on a big scale. Yeah, the waterproof, not so much. So that one is. Yeah, that was a good trial this year, but yeah, that wouldn't be feasible, especially not for field spray.
Any more questions?
369L.
Big black car.
F369L is
Well, the car park is space into a car behind it, I think. What's that?
I just rolled backwards.
into another car.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me.
That's still where it should be.
Oh, Grant, so you're going to go back and check
Yes.
top island? Yeah, see what's become of them?
Yeah. Now the idea where we will try and recite them. Top Island was cleared. I mean, this is.
Where is Top Island?
Top Island is in Port William, so the 2 tussock islands. So the one closer inland is top, and the one that's further out just past the lighthouse is bottom. So it's about 8 kilometres from Kidney Island, where we caught the wrens, to Top Island.
Is it a kilometre across to the coast from there? That's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
Possibly not. I mean, there's a few marginal ones. There are some islands where it's a bit closer, and that's when I say, but it slightly depends. I would say rats seem to be less inclined to invade if they're on the mainland. So I guess because when the rats reach population capacity at the end of summer, and their preferred habitat is along the coast, that's where there's the most feeding potential. You know, the young ones were displaced by the adults, they can move inland. Whereas,
okay, nobody died.
whereas if it's two adjoining islands and one of the islands has got rats, then that year's production of young ones has got nowhere to go. It's a case of you either have to swim or you starve. So the distance between islands tends to be greater than the distance between the mainland and an island. But on average, if you're doing rat eradication, spending a lot of money to do it, you kind of, we take 1 kilometre as a distance. When we first started, we took it for less, but then that first slide, I mean, Sally's better to talk on this because she did most of them. When we first started, we used a lesser distance, but some of these, was it 26 islands that were reinvaded? We were basically using that as a measure. We kind of saw what the distance was of these 26 islands. So going forward, we tend to take 1 kilometre as a safe distance, which if you now look around the islands, Sally has cleared all the islands that are less than 1 kilometre. It's only the bigger islands where you start to need helicopters and bigger logistics that still have to be done. So the last one, the big one, was Bleaker Island in 2019.
I just said, I did it on my own. And also the top and bottom of, they are just at that, like, is it or not distance? That's why Naomi goes out every year, twice or 3 times a year to check. Because if for whatever reason rats did get back, get close enough, and it's a valuable enough project to redo some baiting and re-clear them. You wouldn't want to do that everywhere on the island, but those 2 islands are pretty special. They're along the lines of Kidney and Bushman, and they're now huge numbers of Swedish shearwaters, tussock birds, codfish. So Naomi with Sally are a part of that process of keeping them okay for cotterings.
Any more? Oh, it's great. Thanks very much. That's really, really interesting. It's good to hear about some different projects. So thanks very much indeed. And don't leave without a cake.